Without a doubt, this video, in comparison to any other video that I've done, calls for disclaimers, okay? So I may as well get those in so that people will understand. Again, I don't believe in superior and inferior races. This is not a video where you can go and attack white people. This is not what this is. Because policing is hardly just a white people thing now. Sonia Massey was unalived by a racist white cop. Let's also acknowledge that. This man had a history of violence and even got dishonorably or other than honorably discharged from the armed forces. So the person who offed Sonia Massey, which I'm going to bring up in a monitor, unalived her because offed is inappropriate. I apologize to her family. Was a problematic racist. So I'm not going to dance around that. It's also true that one of the victims I'm going to discuss that had mental illness was likely unalived in California. Though being an Asian male, he was unalived by a cop of Hispanic descent. Just as a young man was abused and harmed in Memphis, Tennessee, him being a foundational Black American, he was attacked by 5 foundational Black American cops. So while there are racist cops on the force, while there is racism, can we also appreciate that some things aren't so much about race as it is inadequate training? But I had to put that out there because we are talking about policing. Believe it or not, that's not what this video will actually be about, but I'm bringing up the police as an example. Because I'm going to ask a question, and the reason I'm going to ask this question is because it needs to be asked. I need foundational Black Americans to understand that when I bring the 2 stories back up, I'm not trying to offend anybody or hurt wounds. I need the Asian community to understand I'm not Asian. I don't understand how you feel. I'm not of your community. But I empathize with these stories simply because I think they should have gotten just as much coverage. And for both communities, I am not here to say that it is the exact same thing. It's not. But the fact that these 2 races of people within short time frames were pew-pewed in less than 2 minutes after each of the doors of their respective homes were opened. A greater conversation needs to be had, not just about the police. And I'll get to that once I break down this, because I'm going to mostly discuss the Asian community, but I want to touch on the pain of things first in the FBA community. Sonia Massey's unaliving, let's be honest, bothered the Black community because it represents everything we have said about bad policing. And again, we can't have this conversation without talking about that element. The more you watch that video, the more you realize this man saw helping this woman because of her skin color as a burden. Oh, she was going to throw hot water at me. I watched that video several times, and that's not what it looked like to me. The fact that she rebuked him in the name of Jesus said she could feel his sinister energy. And then before that, recordings came out showing who he really was. And even amongst his white colleagues, this man was problematic. So I can see him serving prison time, and he deserves to. Okay. Here's the thing. There's a long history in the United States that's now being remedied, where Black women were going missing and no one cared. And this woman who called law enforcement and tried to do the right thing was unalived trying to do the right thing. And it's a classic example of why the black community as a whole feel that they are alone. She genuinely could have had an intruder on her property. And when they realized there was no intruder, they just should have left. So it gives credence to the fact that a woman, especially a black woman who's home alone and calls law enforcement, can expect to be very scared of their circumstances. Pardon the noise in the background. The worst fear of some black women is living alone and needing that help and never knowing who's gonna be sent and if they're actually going to care. Roger Fortson is just as bad, because Roger Fortson was in a long line of black Americans, foundational black Americans who served their country. And the thanks they got was a bullet or lynching or being found unalived, because how dare they put on our uniform for our country despite being born here. My great-grandfather came back from World War I. Not the same. Of course, he passed away 13 years before I was born, but still. There is a long history in this country, particularly of young foundational black American men who served and who are not unalived by their comrades in the armed forces, but are unalived by other people who don't think they're worthy to wear that uniform and look. That's not what happened here. It is the symbology of it that bothers the black community. So we can't get around that symbology. Here's the thing. I've said again, I'm for solidarity with the Asian community, not so much because my husband's half Japanese, but because I don't see any reason for racism. I understand that there is tension between our community and them. I just want to bridge the gap with those of us who are FBA and AAPI who would like to do so. And I respect the ones who don't. How is it that before Roger Fortson, or after Roger Fortson, but before Sonia Massey, we didn't know about Young Yang, the young man in California who was with bipolar, who was unalived by a cop, whom I believe was of Hispanic descent? Why do we not know about the fact that the United Black Agenda is in solidarity due to the unaliving in her own home of Victoria Lee of New Jersey? Also suffering from bipolar just like Young Yang. Though she threw an object in the cop's direction, it was believed to be a water jug. Y'all can correct me. Was it her or was it the voices in her head? And see, before her breakdown, I believe it was Victoria's mother who told them to not bring the cops in, and they came in anyway. Again, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but when I read that story, the way that was handled was derelict. She was unalived weeks after Sonia Massey. Then there was a 13-year-old kid, I think he was Cambodian, you can also correct me if I'm wrong, in Utica, New York, who was unalived by cops while he was playing with a fake pellet gun. All of these unalivings happened this year, and a lot of them cloistered together around the same time. So This is where my question might offend both communities, and please follow me as I'm going somewhere with this. I believe that Sonia Massey and Roger Fortson should get the coverage that they're getting, given that back then things were easier to cover up. And due to the symbology of what happens to black male American-born males who serve in the armed forces, and given the loneliness of black women who live alone, we needed to discuss that issue. Not that the other three stories didn't make the news, but this is what we need to discuss. Why is it that these three stories did not get the coverage that the black Americans got? And I get, as an FBA, people will say I shouldn't ask these questions because I'm not Asian and I should be concerned with my community. Here is my offensive but truthful answer. In comparison with Roger Fortson and Sonia Massey, it's an election year. And it was not politically expedient to mention the unaliving in the Asian communities as opposed to the black communities. Let's pretend like the politics doesn't matter, because it does. Look, I'm not political. Vote for who you want to vote for in this election, whether it's for race, whether it's for policies, whether it's for party affiliation. I'm not here to tell any of you who to vote for. Sorry about the noise again. Should have turned that phone off, but I forgot to do it before I recorded. I'm too late now. And the neighbors are gonna be loud. I've told y'all that repeatedly. Why they want to be loud late at night is a mystery to me, and letting their kids just run and do anything. But let me get off that rant. It is politically expedient, in my opinion, to cover the black or FBA unalivings to affect voter outcome. Certain people are still out to get certain other people, instead of seeing all of these people, regardless of their skin color and racial background, as human beings. On the surface, we all look different, but we still have the same organs on the inside. This is not to say that people who are in political power don't see Asian community as a voter base or don't care about the Asian communities. That's why they have that anti-Asian bill, because they are recognizing Asian contributions in the United States. I also believe there's a fringe amount of people in our society that live on the stereotype. Unfortunately, I don't share this view, that the Asian community as a whole, as a collective, is nonetheless passive and won't sound the alarm and won't stand up for themselves in the way that the black community does. Look, I get that that's offensive, and I'm not saying that you all don't, because I'm seeing the evidence of it. Some people pick and choose what they're going to make political. If this had happened in 2023, there could have been a different outcome, but it all happened this year, in an election year, which means the news channels more than likely decided to cover stories that were going to affect outcomes. And they needed to elevate the FBA community stories in order to affect an outcome, while not suppressing the Asian community. They didn't cover it in the way that they should have. Because if this is an indictment on policing, there has to be some training when being called out on a scene of how to handle people with mental illness, or how to handle various situations. I'm happy that the United Black Agenda has decided to put themselves behind the Asian community. But we know that regardless of your skin color, the United States has always stigmatized mental illness, despite us saying that we care about people's mental health now. I get it. You don't want to go to a scene and be unalived because of something someone else is going through. But for people in law enforcement, you must understand also that that's the job you signed up for when you go on the scene of a crime, or the scene of a non-crime, or of a situation you have to de-escalate. No one is expecting law enforcement to be mental health professionals, but you still have to know that there are levels to de-escalation where mental illness will be involved. But believe it or not, I blame the politics of the media for this more than law enforcement. Because in your incessant need to push agendas, whether you're trying to get votes, whether you're trying to affect or effect outcomes, in this case, both communities were failed. And again, before I close, this was not to offend the Black community, my FBAs, and it was not to offend the AAPI community. But these stories are so close together that they're hard to ignore. It's time for there to be some changes in society, or we're going to go so far backwards that it'll be too late. Let's stop stigmatizing mental illness. Let's stop stigmatizing people who need help. Let's stop stigmatizing people just because we look at them and they look different and they look a certain way. Because we know even amongst poor whites this stuff happens. It's time to do more than just have conversations. It's time for change.